The desperate situation. Hook. The alien queen stood at the edge of her palace, staring out at the once beautiful landscape of her home planet. The sky, once a vibrant shade of blue, was now dark with swirling clouds. The ground trembled beneath her feet. The sun, which had always been a source of warmth and light, was now hidden behind thick, dark clouds. The planet's once thriving cities were now quiet, as if the life itself was being drained away. The queen, a tall and powerful being, had ruled this planet for centuries. Her people had flourished under her leadership, and her planet had been a beacon of peace in the galaxy. But now, everything was falling apart. She could feel the very life force of her world slipping away. For weeks, the scientists and advisors of her kingdom had worked tirelessly, trying to find the cause of the planet's sudden decline. The plants were dying, the animals were fleeing, and the oceans were beginning to dry up. It was as if some unseen force was slowly but surely consuming the planet. "Your Majesty," said one of her advisors, a tall alien with glowing blue skin, "we have tried everything. The machines, the ancient texts, nothing is working. We're running out of time." The queen turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. She was not a queen who gave up easily. She had faced many challenges in her long life, and she had always overcome them. But this was different. This time, there was no easy solution. "There must be something we haven't tried," she said firmly, though doubt began to creep into her voice. "Is there no one, nowhere, who can help us?" The advisor shook his head. "The curse, it's unlike anything we have encountered. It comes from beyond our understanding. We believe it is an ancient power, one that even our greatest minds cannot comprehend." The queen clenched her fists. She had heard of curses before, curses placed on planets or civilizations, but she had never believed they were real. Yet the evidence was right in front of her. Her people were suffering. Her planet was dying. A soft beep echoed through the room. A small device, no bigger than a palm, lit up on the table. The queen walked over to it, and with a swipe of her hand, the device projected a hologram into the air. It was a message, but not one from her planet. It was from an unknown source. The hologram flickered, and a voice echoed through the room, deep and resonant. "Queen of the Elvian Star, your planet's fate is sealed unless you take action. There is only one way to save your world, and it comes from a being not of your kind. You must bring a human to your world. Only the touch of a human can break the curse that threatens to destroy everything you hold dear." The queen was stunned. The human. Her people had never interacted with humans before. The thought of bringing such a creature to her world seemed absurd. How could one human, a species so small and fragile, possibly save a planet like hers? The queen had seen the strength of her own people and their technology. What could a human possibly offer? But as the voice continued, the queen realized there was no other choice. The message didn't lie. The situation was dire. The human touch was the only hope. "You must act quickly, Queen," the voice continued. "Time is running out. Your world will be consumed unless you take this path." The hologram faded away, leaving the queen standing in stunned silence. Her mind raced. Could she really trust this strange message? How could a human, an unknown and untested species, be the key to saving her planet? She didn't even know how to find one. Her thoughts were interrupted by another advisor who had entered the room. He was an older alien with silver scales and eyes full of wisdom. "Your Majesty, the people are waiting for you. They are looking to you for answers. They need hope." The queen felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She had always been the strong leader, the one who knew what to do. But this was beyond her. "I must find a human," she said, her voice heavy with doubt. "I must trust this message." "But, Your Majesty," the advisor said hesitantly, "how can you be certain that this is the answer? There must be another way." "I don't know," the queen admitted, her heart heavy with the weight of her responsibility. "But I have no other choice. My people are suffering. This planet is dying. If there is even the smallest chance that a human can save us, I must take it. She turned to the large window that overlooked the dying world outside. She could feel the desperation in the air, the fear of her people. It was a feeling she had never known before, and it was the one thing that pushed her to make the decision. The Queen nodded firmly. Prepare the transport. We must find this human, no matter where they are. Her advisor nodded and left the room to begin the search. The Queen, however, remained behind, staring at the stormy sky, her thoughts heavy with uncertainty. She knew she was making a dangerous choice. She was putting the fate of her world in the hands of a complete stranger. But she also knew that sometimes desperate times called for desperate measures. As the seconds ticked by, the planet continued to tremble. The sun was completely obscured now, and the darkness seemed to be closing in. The Queen had no time to waste. Her people were waiting. The future of her planet depended on finding a human who could save them all. The stage was set. The Queen had made her decision. But as the transport systems began to work, the question remained: could a human really save an entire planet? Would this stranger from a distant world be the hero they so desperately needed? The fate of the Queen's planet rested on the answer. The arrival of the human. Suspense builds. The air was thick with anticipation as the alien Queen stood in the grand hall of her palace, gazing out at the horizon. The winds howled outside, carrying the whispers of an impending storm, one that mirrored the unrest inside her. Her planet was dying, and time was slipping through her fingers like sand. But in the midst of this uncertainty, a sliver of hope remained. The human was on their way. A deep, low hum vibrated through the palace as the transport vessel neared. It was a sleek, alien craft designed to pierce through the atmosphere and deliver its passengers to their destination. The Queen's heart raced, her thoughts clouded with doubts. Could a human truly be the key to saving her people? Could a being so small, so fragile compared to her powerful ancient race, really possess the power to break the curse that had crippled their world? The transport landed silently in the palace courtyard, its metallic surface gleaming in the dim light. The doors of the vessel slid open with a hiss, revealing a figure clad in a spacesuit, stepping out carefully onto the foreign ground. The human. The Queen's breath caught in her throat. He was nothing like the mighty warriors or wise elders of her people. He was shorter than most of her advisors, his body encased in a bulky suit that made him appear even smaller. His face was hidden behind a visor, but she could sense his uncertainty through the simple movements of his body. A feeling of unease washed over the Queen. This human was untested, a stranger from a distant world. He had never set foot on a planet like hers. Yet, he was the one who held the key to their survival. Could he really save them all? The Queen stepped forward, her regal presence commanding attention. Her guards, massive beings with skin like polished stone, parted to let her pass. She walked with a measured grace, her eyes never leaving the human as he slowly made his way toward her. He looked around in awe, his wide eyes taking in the alien surroundings. The towering spires of her palace, the lush alien trees that seemed to sway to an unheard rhythm, and the distant city skyline. Everything was so different from what he had known. As the human approached, he removed his helmet, revealing his face for the first time. His skin was pale, his eyes a bright blue that seemed to stand out in stark contrast to the darkness around them. He smiled nervously, his mouth dry, as if unsure of how to greet the Queen. "But, Your Majesty, I'm here to help." His voice, though calm, carried a note of uncertainty. The Queen studied him closely. His eyes were filled with fear and wonder, but there was something else, determination. She could see it in the way he held himself, as if he knew the gravity of his task. But was it enough? "You are the human?" the Queen asked, her voice steady but filled with unspoken questions. "The one who is supposed to save us?" The human nodded slowly. I was chosen. I don't know how, but I'm here now. I'll do whatever it takes." The queen's sharp gaze softened for a moment. Despite the doubts swirling in her mind, she felt something stirring within her. There was something different about this human. A strength that didn't come from size or power, but from within. It was not the type of strength she had known her whole life, physical or mental, but a quiet, unyielding resolve. Could this be the answer? "We don't have much time," the queen said, her voice now tinged with urgency. "My planet is dying. The curse we face, it is unlike anything we've ever encountered. It is eating away at our world, and we cannot stop it. Do you truly believe you can save us?" The human hesitated, glancing around at the alien world before him, the weight of her words sinking in. He could feel the tension in the air, the fear that was barely hidden beneath the surface. He had trained for years, studying ancient texts and technologies, preparing for the impossible. But now, standing before the alien queen, he realized that the task ahead was far greater than he had imagined. Could he really break a curse that had crippled an entire planet? "I don't know if I can," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "But I have to try. I've seen the devastation on your planet. I've seen the fear in your people's eyes. I won't let them down." The queen's eyes narrowed slightly, as if testing the human's resolve. She could sense his determination, but in the back of her mind, the doubt lingered. This was her last hope. What if it wasn't enough? What if this human, this fragile being, wasn't the key to breaking the curse? Her voice softened. "Then you will need to trust me. There is a place on this planet, hidden deep within the heart of the mountains. It is where the curse began, where its power is strongest. But it is also a place of great danger. You will face challenges you cannot imagine. Are you prepared for that?" The human nodded, his face resolute. "I am, whatever it takes." With a heavy heart, the queen turned and gestured for him to follow. "Then we begin at once. Time is our enemy, and every moment counts." As they walked towards the palace gates, the human's footsteps echoed in the stillness of the courtyard. The weight of the mission was heavy on his shoulders, but he knew there was no turning back. This alien world, with its strange and powerful creatures, was depending on him. The queen was right. The stakes could not be higher. The challenge was far beyond anything he had faced before, but he had no choice but to press on. They reached the transport vehicle that would take them toward the mountains. As they boarded, the queen looked once more at the human. A fleeting moment of doubt crossed her mind, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of determination. She had put everything on the line. There was no going back now. The engines hummed to life, and the craft lifted off, leaving the palace behind. The queen stared ahead, her heart racing. The journey ahead would be fraught with danger, but it was the only path left. The human had arrived, and together they would face whatever came next. The fate of her planet rested on their shoulders. The hidden truth. The transport sped through the vast, alien landscape, the towering mountains in the distance looming ever closer. The human sat beside the queen, his gaze fixed on the ever-changing world outside the small craft's window. Each passing second felt like an eternity as the journey into the heart of the planet continued. The winds outside were howling, and the storm that had begun to ravage the planet earlier seemed to be growing stronger with every minute. The queen, however, remained silent, her eyes focused on the path ahead. There was something weighing heavily on her, a secret she had yet to reveal to the human. As the ship neared the base of the mountains, the queen finally spoke. Her voice was calm, filled with a gravity that made the human turn to face her. "There is something I must tell you," she said, her words heavy with an ancient sorrow. "A truth about the curse you are about to face. It is not merely a force of nature. It is something far older, far darker than you could imagine. The curse comes from deep within the very foundation of our world." The human raised an eyebrow, sensing the seriousness of her words. "What do you mean? I thought it was just some kind of natural disaster, a strange storm, or something like that." The queen's eyes darkened as she looked out the window. The landscape below was a patchwork of ruined cities and barren fields, once lush with life, but now fading into desolation. Her heart clenched. This was not just a natural disaster, it was something far more sinister. "The curse is not new," she continued. "It was placed upon our planet long ago, by an ancient race, beings whose power was unlike anything we've ever encountered. They were creators, builders of galaxies, but they were also destroyers. They feared what they had created, and in their fear, they'd bound our world with a curse that would one day consume it, just as it is doing now." The human listened intently, his eyes narrowing. "So this curse, it's not just a random disaster. It was planned. By someone." The queen nodded solemnly. "Yes, the beings who placed this curse knew our world's true potential. They feared what we might become, and so they chose to cripple us before we could ever reach that potential." The human's mind raced. He had heard of ancient civilizations, of lost technologies and forgotten histories, but this was something far beyond anything he had studied. Could it really be true? Could such an ancient and powerful force still be at work, controlling the fate of an entire world? "And you think I can stop this?" he asked, a note of disbelief creeping into his voice. The queen looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "I do not know. But the power to break this curse lies within the human touch. It is the only hope we have left. And for reasons we do not fully understand, you are the one who has been chosen." The human sat back in his seat, trying to process the weight of what the queen had just revealed. This was no ordinary mission. The fate of an entire planet rested on his shoulders. His hands, which had once held nothing more dangerous than a control panel or a weapon, now carried the weight of a world. Could he really break a curse that had been placed centuries ago? Was there truly some hidden power within him, waiting to be unleashed? The transport descended slowly, the towering peaks of the mountains rising up around them. The ground below was jagged, the terrain rough and unforgiving. The human's heart pounded in his chest as the ship touched down in a clearing. The air outside was thick with the scent of something ancient and heavy, a foreboding feeling that seemed to hang over the landscape. The queen stood up and motioned for the human to follow. They exited the ship and began walking toward a massive, towering structure hidden deep within the mountains. It was ancient, its walls covered in strange symbols and markings that the human could not understand. The air here felt different, charged, almost alive with an energy that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "This is where it all began," the queen said softly, her voice filled with a deep sadness. "This is the Temple of the Ancients, where the curse was first placed upon our world, and it is here that we must go if we are to have any chance of breaking it." The human looked at the temple, its massive stone doors looming ahead. He could feel the weight of history in the air, the remnants of something long past. But the energy he felt here was not peaceful. It was cold, dark, and oppressive, like a weight that pressed down on him with every step he took. They entered the temple, the walls echoing with their footsteps. The queen moved with purpose, leading him through narrow corridors and vast chambers. The further they went, the colder it became. Strange symbols covered the walls, glowing faintly with an eerie light. "There is a chamber at the heart of the temple," the queen explained. "It is where the curse was sealed. We must reach it, and there you will be able to make your choice. But be warned, the curse has a will of its own. It will try to stop you. It will try to break you." The human nodded, his heart racing. He had prepared for many challenges, but this was something beyond anything he had ever faced. The queen was right. This was no ordinary trial. This was a fight against something ancient, something so powerful that it had withstood the test of time. But now he was the only one who could stand against it. As they reached the center of the temple, a vast chamber opened before them, its walls lined with glowing symbols. At the center of the room stood an altar, ancient and weathered, but still holding a strange otherworldly power. The air was thick with tension as the human approached it, the queen standing silently behind him. "This is where the curse was placed," she said softly. "And this is where it will either end, or where it will consume us all." The human took a deep breath, his mind focused. There was no turning back now. Whatever was ahead, he would face it. He would break the curse or die trying. And as his hand reached out to touch the altar, he knew that everything, his life, the Queen's people, the entire planet, depended on this moment. The fate of the world rested on the touch of a single human. And the truth of the curse was now fully revealed, facing the impossible. The air inside the temple was thick, as though every breath the human took carried the weight of an ancient power pressing down upon him. He stood at the center of the chamber, the altar glowing softly beneath his fingers. The Queen, standing a few paces behind, watched him intently, her presence heavy with expectation. "This is it," she whispered. "We've come as far as we can. Now, it is up to you." The human's pulse quickened. Every step he had taken up until now had led to this moment. His mind raced with doubt. Was he truly the one to end this curse? He had been trained for so many things, yet nothing could have prepared him for this. The weight of a planet's survival rested on his shoulders, and the power of an ancient curse seemed impossible to overcome. As his hand hovered above the altar, a strange sensation washed over him. The air around him began to hum with energy, and the very walls seemed to pulse, as if the temple itself were alive and watching. He knew then that the curse wasn't just a force to be defeated. It was a living thing, an ancient consciousness that fed on fear and despair. It had waited centuries for this moment, and it wasn't going to give up without a fight. Suddenly, the ground beneath him shook. The stone walls trembled, and the symbols along the walls glowed brighter, pulsing with an ominous rhythm. A deep guttural sound filled the chamber, the voice of the curse itself, ancient and filled with malice. "You cannot stop me," the voice rumbled, echoing through the temple. "I have existed long before you, and I will consume your world as I have consumed so many others." The human stumbled back, his heart pounding. The Queen's face hardened, her eyes narrowing as she prepared herself for whatever was coming next. "We cannot let it stop us," she said urgently. "You must hold on. Your touch is the key." The human took a deep breath, feeling his resolve strengthen. The curse may have been ancient, but he had something it could never understand. Hope. Hope and courage that no force, no matter how old or powerful, could take away. The voice of the curse grew louder, more insistent, its words filled with venom. "You are nothing but a speck of dust in the grand scheme of things. You cannot win. You cannot break what was made to last." The human clenched his fists. "Maybe I'm small," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm not alone, and I won't give up. Not now. Not ever." As the words left his mouth, the temple seemed to shake violently, as if the curse itself were enraged by his defiance. The walls cracked, sending shards of stone flying, but the human stood firm. His feet were planted, and despite the chaos around him, his mind remained clear. The Queen stepped forward, standing beside him. "It's trying to break your spirit," she said, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "But you must not let it. You must face it. You must trust that the power within you is greater than it thinks." The human nodded, knowing that this was the moment when everything would either fall apart or come together. He wasn't sure how he could defeat such an ancient, relentless force, but he had no other choice. His hands trembled as he reached out again, this time touching the altar. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then, as if the universe held its breath, a strange warmth spread through his fingertips. The symbols on the walls began to pulse with light, and the ground beneath him stopped shaking. He felt something deep inside, something ancient stirring in response to his touch. The curse's voice screamed in fury. "You think you can undo centuries of power with your pathetic human hands." It raged, its voice growing distorted and desperate. "I will make you regret this." But the human didn't falter. He closed his eyes and focused, blocking out the curse's words. He reached into himself, searching for the strength he had been told was hidden within him. His fingers tightened on the altar, and with a quiet, unwavering resolve, he whispered to the curse, "I'm not afraid of you. You don't control me. And you don't control this world." The moment the words left his lips, the air around him seemed to shift. The temple walls, once glowing with dark energy, began to dim. The hum of the curse's power slowly faded, replaced by a new sound, the sound of life returning to the planet. A gentle breeze, once absent from the planet for so long, stirred around the human, carrying with it the scent of distant flowers and fresh soil. The storm outside, which had raged for so long, began to calm, as if the very planet itself were breathing a sigh of relief. The queen, standing beside him, felt the change as well. Her eyes widened in astonishment. "It's working," she whispered. "You're doing it." But the curse wasn't finished. With a final roar of defiance, it surged with violent energy, attempting to crush the human's resolve. The air crackled with raw power, and the ground beneath them began to crack open, threatening to swallow them whole. The queen grabbed the human's arm, her strength matching his, and together they held onto the altar. "You can't let it break you now," the queen urged, her voice fierce. The human nodded, gathering every ounce of willpower he had left. He closed his eyes, focusing on the planet, on the queen's people, on the lives he was fighting for. And then, with a final burst of determination, he pressed his hands harder against the altar, his voice rising as he shouted, "Enough!" The energy that had been swirling around them surged outward, and with a deafening crack, the curse's grip shattered. The air cleared, the light in the temple returned to its natural state, and the earth beneath them stilled. Silence fell, deep and profound, as the curse was broken. The human stepped back, his legs weak from the strain. He looked at the queen, who was staring at him in awe. The storm outside had ceased, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the sky was clear. "We did it," the human said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We really did it." The queen smiled, a tear of relief and gratitude shining in her eyes. "You have saved us all." The impossible had been faced, and the curse had been defeated, not by force, but by the unshakable will of one human. And in that moment, the fate of the planet had been forever changed. The heart of the curse. The silence that followed the defeat of the curse was not peaceful. It was a quiet that resonated with the aftermath of something ancient and powerful being undone. The human stood in the center of the temple, his body trembling from the intensity of the battle. He could feel the weight of the moment, of all that had been lost and all that had been saved. The air around him seemed to hum with a new energy, an energy that was as foreign to him as the planet itself. The queen, though visibly relieved, did not yet celebrate. She looked at him, her eyes sharp with concern. "This is only part of it," she said, her voice steady, but filled with an urgency that still echoed through the now still temple. "The curse has been broken, but there is more. The true heart of the curse, the one that ties this world to its destruction, lies deeper. We must face it together." The human's eyes narrowed. Despite everything he had just endured, he could feel it too. The atmosphere around him was different, but there was still an undercurrent of something wrong. He glanced at the altar where he had just fought the curse, and in the flickering light, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. A deep, dark crack running through the stone, as if the curse itself had left an indelible mark on the world. "What do you mean, deeper?" the human asked, his voice steady despite the lingering fear that gripped him. The queen's gaze was grave. The curse was not just a force of nature. It was tied to the heart of our world, to the very core of it. The ancients didn't just curse the surface, they bound the planet's life force itself. What you destroyed was the external manifestation of that curse, but the core, the heart, is still tainted. The human felt the ground beneath him vibrate again, faint but unmistakable. Something was stirring below them. The air grew colder, the walls seemed to close in around them, and the once clear sky outside darkened once again. The weight of their failure to fully vanquish the curse was settling on him like a storm cloud. Then how do we stop it? The human asked, his mind racing. They had come so far. They had fought against an ancient power, broken its external form, and yet it wasn't enough. How could one human, how could anyone, fight against something so deeply embedded in the very fabric of the planet? We have to descend deeper into the heart of the planet, the queen said, her eyes steady. The temple's foundation was built around an ancient power core, one that holds the key to the curse's origin. We must go to it, and only by reaching it will we be able to truly sever the planet's ties to this darkness. The human felt his pulse quicken. The path ahead was unknown, dangerous, and perhaps even impossible, but there was no other option. With the queen's guidance, he had fought against the curse, and he had won. But now, a far more dangerous challenge lay ahead. How do we even get to this core? He asked, looking around the temple. Its grandeur was overwhelming, with massive stone columns stretching toward the high ceiling. Yet beneath that grandeur, the decay of time was apparent. Everything seemed unstable now, as though the very structure was starting to collapse under the weight of its own secrets. The queen gestured to a hidden door in the far wall, concealed beneath layers of dust and stone. This door leads to the deeper chambers, she explained. It is not easy to reach, nor is it without peril, but within those chambers is the path to the planet's core. The human nodded, stepping forward. Despite the growing unease in his stomach, he knew that this was the only way forward. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. He looked at the queen, whose expression was unreadable. "Let's go," he said quietly. Together, they moved toward the hidden doorway. The air grew colder with every step they took, and the walls seemed to close in on them, as though the temple itself were alive and aware of their presence. The queen's hand brushed against the stone as they moved deeper, her eyes scanning their surroundings. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It felt as though they were descending into the very bones of the planet, and the deeper they went, the more they could feel the darkness that clung to everything. It was suffocating, a presence that could not be seen but could certainly be felt. As they reached the first of many narrow passageways, the ground shook again. The sound of rumbling echoed in the distance, but this time it was not just a tremor. It felt deliberate, almost as if the planet itself were fighting against them. "Stay close," the queen warned, her voice a low whisper. "It knows we are coming. It will try to stop us." The human's heart raced as they moved through the winding corridors, the walls becoming tighter and darker with every turn. Strange symbols appeared on the stone surfaces, symbols that seemed to shift when they weren't looking, as though they were alive, watching them. Then they reached a massive chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. In the center of the room was a large crystal, glowing faintly with a dark, almost pulsating energy. The air around it was thick with a presence that sent a chill down the human spine. The queen stopped, her eyes fixed on the crystal. "This is the heart of it, the core of the curse. It is what binds the curse to the planet. Destroy it, and we will have a chance. Fail, and the curse will consume us all." The human took a step forward, his mind spinning. The crystal was immense, its glow casting eerie shadows across the walls. It seemed alive, pulsing in rhythm with the energy of the planet itself. "This is it," the human whispered, his voice barely audible. "This is the final battle." The queen nodded. "You must touch it. Only your touch can break the connection between the planet and the curse. But be warned, the moment you do, the planet will fight back. The curse will try to reclaim what you've already taken." With no time left to waste, the human stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached out toward the crystal. He could feel the dark energy swirling around him, pushing against him, trying to pull him away. But he wouldn't stop. Not now. And as his fingers brushed against the crystal, the planet itself seemed to scream in fury. The battle was far from over, and this time, It would take everything the human had to break the heart of the curse once and for all. The final battle. The moment the human's fingers made contact with the crystal, the world around him erupted into chaos. The air itself screamed in agony, as if the very planet were protesting, fighting back against the intrusion. The crystal pulsed violently, releasing waves of dark energy that crackled and shimmered like lightning. The human staggered, his body trembling from the force of the power surging through him. But he held his ground. There was no turning back now. The queen stepped back, her eyes wide in shock. "It's too much," she shouted. "The planet is fighting you, fighting us." The crystal's dark energy intensified, rippling outward like a shockwave, sending cracks through the floor and walls of the chamber. The ground beneath them began to buckle and shift, as if the very core of the planet was destabilizing. A low rumble echoed through the chamber, and the human could feel the earth beneath him moving, shifting, as though the planet itself was trying to tear them apart. "You have to hold on," the queen urged, her voice strained. "The planet won't let go without a fight." But the human's body was already giving in. His head spun, and he could feel the pressure on his chest as the curse's power tried to suffocate him. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he wondered if he could even stand. But then, in the midst of the suffocating darkness, a single thought pierced through the storm. "The world is depending on me. I cannot fail." He focused all his energy into the contact with the crystal, forcing his hand deeper into the stone. The swirling energy seemed to push back harder, but with each moment, he felt something new inside him. A strength, a pulse of raw power that surged from within, as though his touch was awakening something buried deep inside the heart of the planet itself. The curse was not just a force, it was an infection, a parasite that had wrapped itself around the planet for centuries. And now, it was trying to protect itself with everything it had. But the human was not alone. In the darkness surrounding him, he could sense the queen's presence, unwavering and strong. Despite the chaos, despite the storm raging around them, she stood firm, her focus on him. "You are not just human," the queen called out, her voice piercing through the chaos. "You are the one who brings hope. You are the key to freeing us all. Trust in that." The human took a deep breath, and in that moment, he realized something crucial. It wasn't just the physical act of touching the crystal that mattered. It was the belief in his purpose, in the belief that he could bring change, that he could overcome the impossible. This was more than strength. This was courage, hope, and determination made manifest. With a final, desperate cry, he slammed his hand fully onto the crystal, pushing every ounce of his being into the connection. The dark energy around him screamed, writhing and struggling against the force of his will, but it wasn't enough. With a blinding flash of light, the crystal cracked, sending a shockwave that rattled the chamber, and the sound of 1,000 whispers filled the air. The human staggered, his body pushed to its limits, but as the crystal shattered, the dark energy that had once consumed the planet began to recede. The ground stopped shaking. The storm above them dissipated, and the chamber fell silent. For a long moment, everything was still. The human slowly pulled his hand away from the broken crystal, his body aching, every muscle trembling from exhaustion. He could barely stand. But as he looked around, he saw something he hadn't dared hope for, the faintest light breaking through the darkened sky above. The planet was healing. The queen, equally exhausted, stepped forward, her expression a mixture of awe and relief. She reached out to support the human, her strong hand steadying him. "You did it," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "You saved us." He nodded, though the words felt heavy in his mouth. He had saved them, yes, but at what cost? The weight of everything he had just endured pressed on him, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he could take another step. The energy it had taken to break the curse felt like it had drained him of everything, and he knew that he had given all he had to offer. But it was worth it. Slowly, the world around them began to return to life. The ground, once cracked and poisoned by the curse, began to heal, the cracks mending like the closing of old wounds. The air felt fresher, lighter, as if the very atmosphere had been cleansed. The sky, once filled with dark, swirling clouds, began to clear, revealing the first rays of sunlight in what felt like an eternity. The queen turned to the human, her eyes filled with gratitude. "The curse is gone," she said softly. "The planet is free." But the human wasn't listening to her. His gaze was focused on something beyond the palace, beyond the temple, the land that was slowly beginning to recover. He could see the distant cities stirring back to life, the once barren fields beginning to bloom with new plant life. It was as if the world itself was breathing again. "We did it," the human murmured to himself. "It's over." But the queen's voice interrupted his thoughts. "No, it's just the beginning." The human turned to her, confusion in his eyes. "What do you mean?" She smiled, a look of wisdom and hope in her eyes. "The curse has been broken, but now we have to rebuild. It will take time. It will take effort. But with the curse gone, we have a chance, a real chance to grow and flourish." The human nodded slowly, realizing the depth of her words. Their work wasn't over. It had only just begun. But the weight of what had been accomplished, the lifting of the curse, the salvation of an entire world, was enough to make him believe that even the impossible could be achieved. He took a deep breath, the air around him now feeling rich and full of promise. With the queen by his side, and the planet's future no longer under threat, he felt something stirring within him. The realization that he wasn't just an outsider here anymore. He was part of this world's story. And together, with the queen and the people she led, they would rebuild. The final battle was over, but the true journey was only beginning. The touch of hope. The landscape of the planet had changed before their eyes. A transformation so vast and profound it felt like a dream. The skies, once thick with storm clouds, were now clear and vast, stretching in all directions like a blank canvas waiting to be filled. The ground beneath them, once cracked and lifeless, was now pulsing with a soft, renewed energy, like a heart beating once more. The air, rich with the scent of blooming flora, carried a sense of rebirth, a sense of hope. The human stood at the edge of the temple, gazing out over the world he had helped save. His body still ached from the battle, the exhaustion creeping into his bones, but there was a lightness to his heart. He had done it. They had done it. Beside him, the queen stood tall and resolute, her eyes watching the same world he was, a world that was no longer on the brink of destruction. The curse had been broken, and the planet had begun to heal. But there was something more in her gaze, something that told him this was only the beginning. "You did it," the queen said, her voice calm but full of deep gratitude. She looked at the human with something akin to awe, but also with respect. "You didn't just save us, you gave us hope." The human turned to her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I didn't do it alone. It was all of us, together. You, your people, and me. We all played our part." She nodded, her eyes softening with a rare tenderness. "Perhaps, but you were the one who believed when no one else did. When the planet was dying, when everything seemed lost, it was your courage, your touch that changed everything. You brought us hope when we had none left." The human glanced back at the planet, his mind replaying everything that had happened, how he had stepped into an alien world, how he had fought an ancient curse, and how, despite every reason to fail, he had pushed forward. It had been a test of more than his physical strength. It had been a test of his heart, of his belief that no matter the odds, no matter how impossible the task seemed, change was still possible. He felt the weight of her words settle within him. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without your guidance, your strength, your belief in me." The queen smiled, a rare, genuine expression that softened her features. "Then we truly are bound together. You from a distant world, and we from this one. We are connected now, by what we've endured, by what we've overcome." The human nodded, but his thoughts were drawn to something else. The people of the Queen's world, the survivors, had begun to emerge from the ruins of the city, cautious but curious. They looked around at the transformed land, their eyes wide with wonder and disbelief. For so long, they had known only fear, only despair, and now they were faced with the incredible gift of a second chance. The Queen turned to the human, her expression changing. "We must return to the people," she said softly. "They will want to see you. They will want to thank the one who brought them back from the edge of destruction." The human hesitated, his gaze lingering on the horizon, where the first rays of a new dawn were beginning to break. He could feel the weight of his decision, the moment of quiet reflection that had washed over him. He wasn't just a visitor anymore. He wasn't an outsider. He was part of this world, part of its story, woven into its future in a way he could never have imagined when he first arrived. "I think it's time," he said, his voice firm, but filled with a quiet certainty. He turned to face the Queen, ready to join the people he had helped save, to stand among them not as a stranger, but as a friend. As they made their way through the palace toward the waiting crowds, the human couldn't help but notice how the air seemed lighter, the world around him vibrant with the promise of new beginnings. The planet was healing, the curse was broken, and hope had returned where despair had once ruled. The people of the Queen's world gathered in the palace square, their faces a mixture of awe and reverence as the Queen and the human approached. They looked at the human with a mixture of gratitude and wonder, as if they couldn't quite believe that this stranger, from a faraway world, had given them the gift of life. The Queen stepped forward and raised her hand, signaling for silence. As the crowd grew quiet, she turned to face them, her voice clear and strong. "People of this world," she began, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "This human, this hero, has done what no one else could. He has saved our world. He has brought us back from the brink of destruction. And because of his bravery, we have a future." She turned to the human, her expression filled with pride. "This man did not come here to conquer us. He came to help us. He touched our world with his courage, and in doing so, he changed the fate of us all. Let us not forget what he has done. Let us not forget the power of hope." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the square, but the human's heart swelled not with pride, but with humility. He had not come here expecting thanks, nor had he ever imagined that he would be hailed as a hero. But as he looked around at the people, their faces filled with hope, their eyes shining with the possibility of a new tomorrow, he understood what it truly meant to be a part of something bigger than himself. The Queen stepped beside him, her presence steady and strong, and together they looked out over the crowd. It was a moment that felt timeless, a moment that could never be undone. "We have been given a second chance," the Queen said softly, her voice carrying to every corner of the square. "And it is because of the human who believed in us." The human smiled, feeling the weight of her words sink in. He had done what he had set out to do, not just for himself, but for an entire world. He had shown them that no matter how dark the storm, no matter how insurmountable the odds, there was always a chance for a better tomorrow. And as the crowd cheered, as the Queen stood proudly by his side, the human knew that the story of this world, and his place in it, was only just beginning. This was not the end. This was only the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, renewal, and the promise of a future that they would all share together.